Right, hey guys, how are we doing? Back with another video from Annie News. So I randomly watched the first episode of Arifureta. Didn't realize it was on Crunchyroll. Um, Everything from Funimation shifted over, didn't it? And I don't know what am I watching? What am I watching? It's so confusing. I don't understand what the hell's going on. It seems like so much has just been smashed into that first episode. And I'm like, all right. Like, for one, is it an Isekai? I have no inkling as to whether this guy got transported except for, like, a random clip on the opening sequence where, like, there's a school that's got, like, a thing, like, exploding out of the ceiling, like, which seemed completely out of place for the world that I have not seen much set up for within this. So, mate, I'm hoping this, which is Arifureta content, What Did the Anime Change? Episode 0, where we got Hajime's past and new world explained. So that implies to me that he's been teleported to a new world. But that first episode does no kind of explanation of that whatsoever. So I'm going to calm down. And let's see what's going on?
Arifureta had a bit of a rocky start.
Yeah?
I mean, the source material is rated quite highly, yet the anime doesn't seem to follow in its footsteps. And that's because the anime went full steam ahead and really rushed episode 1. For context, they jumped right into chapter 2 of the light novel, which means they skipped approximately the first 30% of volume 1.
Wow. You can really see that. Like, I have no clue about this story whatsoever, but it seems so rushed.
Only ever briefly referencing it in flashbacks. But that's why we have this series, so we can go episode by episode and take a look at what the anime skipped from both the light novel and the manga. And
So
as
manga
I've
as
done
well.
with Overlord, Goblin Slayer, and most recently the Rising of the Shield Hero,
Mate, Overlord and Goblin Slayer cut content videos, amazing. Shield Hero Season 1, I kind of dropped off the cut content. I don't know why. Like, back in the day, I really enjoyed it. But then the Season 2 stuff, I understand why people didn't watch it, because no one was watching the anime anyway, so fair. But when Season 3 comes around, fair. But Overlord and Goblin Slayer cut content, absolute peak.
I'll try to cover the most important scenes that help develop both the characters and the world, as well as go more in depth into how the world's magic, combat, and leveling systems function. That way we can really get a grasp as to the type of setting that we find ourselves in with this new isekai. So let's begin the cut content for Arifureta,
I'm seeing clips here that aren't in the first episode, but okay.
from Commonplace to World's Strongest. I'm going to start with the prologue, which covers events from Hajime's days in school before being teleported to the fantasy world of Tortoise.
Wait, so he is. That's madness. Absolute madness. No inkling as it being an isekai in the first episode whatsoever, except for like one clip in the opening sequence.
But there is the possibility that these events could be covered in a flashback. However, it's not looking likely since we're already 3 episodes in and—
Oh, okay, so he's using clips from 1, 2, 3. But then I did see that like the next one is episode 1 stuff, which I think is cool. I can check that out after this, depending.
the window to showcase these events seem to be closing or are already long past. Anyway, we have our main character, Hajime Nagumo, falling into a pit of darkness, causing his whole life to flash before his eyes, leading us to the events from a few days earlier. A normal Monday, back in the real world. And this was Hajime's most depressing and hated day of the week. You see, Monday meant he
Nobody likes Mondays.
had to go to school. And Hajime hated going to school. From the moment he'd walk into class, he'd be greeted with glares from mostly every student, as if his mere presence had immediately soured the air.
But why?
Then when he sat down, he'd be tormented by his classmate Hiyama, the apparent leader of Hajime's harassment campaign. He'd always make fun of Hajime for being an
Oh, so other people teleported in as well. What?
otaku, one that would stay up all night playing video games or reading manga, then show up to class the next day and just sleep through its entirety. Which were all technically true statements, but it's not like he was a weird guy to interact with. Sure, he really liked to read light novels and play games and didn't really talk very much, but he was still very much able to hold a normal conversation.
Okay.
He was, by all means, an average student. So, why the poor treatment then?
Yeah.
Well, that was for a different reason. You see, there were very few people in the school who treated Hajime kindly, and one of them was Kaori Shirasaki. She was the most
So,
popular girl in school,
This is
often
mad.
called a goddess by many. She loved to help others and had a strong sense of responsibility. which led to her becoming one of the most respected students. Yet, for some reason, she took a great interest in Hajime, like significantly more than any other student.
So it's kind of like the only other example I can think of is like so I'm a spider, so what? Where like the whole class got teleported, but they're all together.
Always finding an opportunity to talk to him even though others would mock him. Most thought that it was because she was trying to help fix Hajime's bad habits of sleeping through class. I mean, she was known for looking after other people, so it'd make sense that she'd try to help out the so-called problem student when she could. If that was in fact the case, or if Hajime was just more handsome, then the other students wouldn't have had a problem with it. But it's because he was just an average guy with a motto of hobbies over real life that his attitude didn't seem to change, even with all the attention from Kaori. Because of this, a lot of the male students became jealous, always thinking, why him and not us?
You grow out of that.
Meanwhile, the girls thought that because Hajime wasn't changing as a person, he was being rude towards Kaori's supposed efforts to make him a better student.
Oh, so everyone's got a really negative look on this.
As for what Hajime thought of this, he just couldn't understand why the most beautiful girl in school would care about a guy like him. He felt there was an ulterior motive behind her whole look after other students maxim, and there was no way someone like her would ever be interested in someone like him. I mean, he was the embodiment of an average person with zero outstanding traits, while she was, well, a goddess. So it just didn't make sense why she was always so fixated on him and him alone. Anyway, Kaori would come in every morning and greet Hajime at his desk, and today was no different. He casually greeted her back, then was confronted by Kaori's other friends. First, we have Shizuku Yaegashi, an undefeated kendo champion who was peerless with the sword, being quite popular not only inside school but outside as well, since she's been featured in many magazines before. Next, we have Koki Amanagawa, who many consider to be the embodiment of perfection because he was athletic, handsome, had outstanding grades, and a supposedly strong sense of justice. And finally, there was Ryutaro Sakagami, Koki's best friend. He was a musclehead who...
So, yeah, I'm getting that, like, the class got teleported in, right? And they're in the bloody group. That is insane that I'm learning that from this and not the actual episode, but whatever.
Loved hard work and determination. So that made it hard for him to get along with Hajime, since Hajime never showed any of those things. Now, out of these three, Yaegashi was the only one who treated Hajime somewhat kindly, whereas Koki disliked Hajime for the same reason as many of the other guys. He thought Hajime was taking advantage of Kaori's kindness, but it was actually the opposite. Hajime wanted nothing more than for Kaori to just leave him alone. Of course, if he said that, he'd forever be the most hated guy in school, so it was just best to say nothing at all.
Aww.
As Amanagawa tries to get Hajime to distance himself from Kaori, Kaori herself chimes in to say that she's talking to Hajime because she wants to. Needless to say, no one actually believed her words. They all thought that she was just being nice so as to not hurt Hajime's feelings, especially Amanagawa. You see, he had such faith in his own righteousness that he felt he was right all the time. Everything he says and thinks must be the truth because to him, he can't be wrong.
Sounds like an absolute twat.
Anyway, class finished for Hajime just as quick as
I said it, so it is what it is. Shut up.
it started, because he slept through the entire thing. Then when lunch came around, he quickly ate his food and went back to sleep. But Kaori had other plans. She noticed that Hajime was already finished eating, so she sat with him and offered him some more food. Amanagawa saw this, and he thought it was absurd for someone like Hajime to eat Kaori's food.
So weird. Oh, shut up. Like, do people actually think this? Do people... I've been to high school. Is it a Japan thing? Someone gives something... It's like, oh, how dare he think it's okay to eat that really popular person's... Oh, shut up.
So he interrupted them and told Kaori to come eat with him instead. She, of course, declined, so Amanagawa, Sakagami, and Yaegashi joined them instead. Now, having the four most popular students in school eat lunch with Hajime just made the other students glare at him with disgust even more.
Oh my
and
god.
Hajime knew this. It was at that moment that he wished that all four of them would just get summoned to another world or something. From his perspective, they'd be the perfect party of four. They were
Hey, we got Overlord. Yeah.
pretty much the
Don't
most
touch me.
stereotypical type of group to get sent to another world. And just as you'd expect, not a few moments later, a magic circle engraved with various patterns starts to glow on the floor.
What? This seems insane to me. I've just watched the first episode and none of this is explained. What?
The light from it then engulfed the whole room.
I mean,
and
yeah,
once
we got
it dissipated,
that in
not
the
a
opening,
single
but that's
student who was
it.
there was left. This event then became known as the Mass High School Disappearance Incident, and it caused quite a stir across the globe. But what happens in the real world after they get teleported is a story for another time. We now find ourselves in
How do we find out, though? That's an interesting take,
the
alright.
first moments that Hajime wakes up after being isekai'd, which is still not even close to where the anime started. But Hajime awakes to the sight of the mural of Ehit, the goddess of creation that we saw in episode 2. He was in some sort of chamber that resembled the inside of an old cathedral, encircled by approximately 30 people clad in white robes that looked as if they were praying. Hajime wasn't alone. It seemed that everyone from his class, including those that weren't even in the classroom, were all teleported to this new place. They were then
Oh, so what's the point of the circle then?
greeted by the Pope of the Holy Church, Ishtar Langbard, who brings them to the room we see here in order to discuss the circumstances of their summoning. Now, you'd expect at least a few students from a class of 36 to be freaking out, but it would seem that Amanagawa's charisma and composed attitude managed to calm the rest of the class. Maids started to flood the hall and pour everyone drinks. The boys of the class couldn't help
Nice.
but stare at the real maids that stood before them. I mean, even Hajime sneaked a glance, but as he did, he could feel a glacial stare piercing his back. When he looked towards the direction that he felt it from, he could see Kaori happily staring at him. Because it was her, of all people, Hajime could only pretend that he didn't feel anything odd. With everyone now settled, Ishtar begins to present all the information that these students need to know about the world of Tortoise. As we know, there are humans, demons, and demi-humans.
Right.
Humans reside in the northern half
You see, again, maybe I should have watched the first 3 episodes, but yeah, I like that I'm going in from this from the perspective of someone that's just watched the first episode. It's mad that none of this is explained. I'm going to keep repeating that.
of the continent, demons in the south, and demi-humans far to the east in a massive forest.
Okay.
We've
I think I will continue watching Arifureta and just keep watching these cut content videos. Because, yeah, why the hell not? And then I still need to watch this 3 Danmachi cut content videos I haven't watched, so yeah.
then learn of the lengthy war that's been raging on for hundreds of years between humans and demons. Demons were by far the more powerful race, but humans had strength in numbers, resulting in a
More of
fairly
them,
equal
right.
balance in power. That was until demons began to gain control of the monsters. Monsters were wild animals that had undergone a magical
That rabbit was creepy, man.
metamorphosis after having mana poured into them.
And that thing was just, I don't know. Didn't really think much of it. Just ate his arm and then just died.
It made them much more powerful and gave them the ability to use magic. This tipped the power balance in the demon's favor, resulting
Excuse
in
me.
the human's guardian deity and supreme ruler who created the world itself to have to summon humans from another world in order to defend this one. You see, Hajime's world is greater than Tortoise, meaning Hajime and his classmates carry strength that surpasses any human in this world. Well, that's what Ishtar was shown to believe anyway. He was apparently shown visions of what to do by their god Ehit. In fact, it was this very ability to have divine visions that landed him this high-ranking position in the Holy Church. It's because almost every human in Tortoise revered Ehit, and they were made to follow their god's will without question. So it makes sense that those who were supposedly closest to God would be the highest ranking. Now, as we saw in the anime, Hajime's teacher Ayako wasn't too fond of what she just heard. There was no way she was going to let her students fight in a war, but unfortunately, due to Aiko's childlike appearance and attitude, the students didn't really see her as an adult that needs to be respected. Instead, she was more like a teacher that needs to be protected. Even so, Ishtar heard her complaints, and he told Aiko that there was nothing he could do for the students anyway. He couldn't return them back to the real world even if he wanted to. That was something only Ehit had the power to do, and it was only Ehit that could decide to do it. So yeah, their ability to return back home relied completely on a supernatural being that no one was sure even existed.
Yeah, someone they can't even get in touch with and be like, hey, blip blip, can you please send these back? Voicemail. Right, yes, fair.
Many students began to panic, but Hajime just seemed rather unfazed. I mean, to him, this was an all too familiar premise. Based on all the stories that he's read, it could have been worse. Like, they could have all just been summoned as slaves. So by Isekai standards, currently they were doing pretty well.
Yeah, they're doing alright. Like, there are worse situations you could be in an Isekai.
Amanagawa was the one to settle things down, since he figured that because there was no other options, then they might as well fight in hopes of A-Hit sending them back afterwards. Eventually, everyone did come to an agreement. Ishtar smiled, satisfied with the outcome, though something was odd about him, and Hajime knew it. He decided to take note of all the peculiar aspects.
I mean, that is pretty intimidating, the way his face is darked out in that eye. I wouldn't trust him. Oh no.
Of Ishtar's character. It seemed like he was someone that he needed to keep an eye on. With everyone willingly accepting their roles as soldiers in this war, the logical next step for them was to learn how to fight. Ishtar expected this, so he sent them all to the Halai Kingdom, a kingdom with a rich history that had close ties to the church since it was founded by one of A-Hit's descendants. Their current location was the Temple of the Holy Church, which was built at the summit of a mountain, and at the foot of it was the kingdom. Ishtar used a spell called Celestial Path, which created a magic circle that acted as a platform to glide the students down the mountain all the way to the capital city of the kingdom. All the while, Hajime couldn't help but think of how absurd this world was. Just the fact that everything and everyone was dependent on a single god filled him with unease. The reason being that he was well aware of the numerous tragic outcomes that stem from politics mixing with religion. But those thoughts weren't really helping, so he cleared his head and focused his attention to the massive castle that they were approaching. As if they were following standard isekai procedure, they were taken directly to the king.
Standard isekai procedure. Okay.
To meet him, his wife, and his son and daughter. Then came the knight captain, the prime minister, and other dignitaries of the kingdom, after which a huge feast was laid out. Then each student was taken to their own individual rooms to rest up for the night. The next day would mark the beginning of their training. It was to be carried out by the knight captain, Meld Loggins. He first handed everyone what's called a status plate, a very important tool that functions both as ID cards and as a personal stat tracker. By placing a drop of blood on the plate, it marks it as your own, then displays various parameters as numerical values.
I am learning this from this and not the actual anime.
No one was really sure how the plates worked.
Absolute
But
madness.
what they did know was that they were artifacts left over from the ancient times, made during the Age of Gods when the creator's descendants still walked the earth. Now, normally an artifact like this would be coveted as a national treasure, but there were enough of these status plates to go around that even the average citizen owned one. They were one of the few artifacts that the people of Tortoise were capable of reproducing, and so they were mass manufactured, widely distributed, and then used as identification.
Cool.
Hajime then proceeded
Makes
to
sense.
activate his own, which caused the plate to turn to a light blue color. This represented the color of his mana. You see, every person's mana had a distinct color, and
Right.
the plate would change its own color to match that. Hajime looked around to see what the others were. Amanagawa's was pure white, Ryutaro's dark green, Kaori's a light purple, and Shizuku a deep blue.
So they've all got different ones. Okay, that is interesting. That's cool.
Then he looked back down and checked his stats. He was level 1 with all parameters set to 10. He had a job of synergist and skills of transmutation and language comprehension. In Tortoise, the average person at level 1 had stats at around 10, making Hajime average even in this world.
I mean, which is good. He's not below average, so that's alright.
But that didn't mean that he couldn't improve them. The highest level a person could reach was 100,
Right.
and once you got there, all your latent potential would be unlocked. The way you did that was by increasing your stats through rigorous training. If your stats grew, then so did your level. It was also noted that you can use magic items to improve your stats as well. Apparently, mana is very useful in assisting with their growth. That's why those with high magic stats often level up faster than others. Then, jobs basically represented innate talent, and it determined the unique skills and abilities that only you could use. Very few people possessed a job, but for those that had them, they were split into combat and non-combat disciplines. The combat jobs were highly rare, with only 1 in every 1,000 or 10,000 people landing one. Regardless, Hajime was worried about his current stat level. I mean, he was supposed to be more powerful than the average person, yet here he was, still average.
Yeah, well, that's the whole thing, innit? Like, you gotta find your thing, your random thing that no one else is gonna find, till you boost it, and then you're not gonna understand why, but you have that, and then boom, OP.
Meld then requested everyone
Let's eat some monsters in a dungeon.
to present their stats. So, of course, Amanagawa stepped up first. His job was Hero, with stats all sitting at 100 and a whole bunch of skills to boot. In comparison, this was about a third of Meld's strength. Meld was level 62, with all his stats within the 300 range. He was said to be one of the strongest humans alive, but with Amanagawa now around, he would be surpassed in no time. Hajime hoped that Amanagawa was just a special case, but as more people showed their stats, they all had crazy skills and combat-based jobs.
It looks like the people from the other world have been summoned for a reason.
Not as good as Amanagawa's, but still strong enough to be considered useful. Hajime seemed to be the only one with a non-combat based job and a couple skills. And it's not like he could learn new skills either. Sure, there did exist these things called derivative skills that could be acquired, but that required a lifetime of work polishing a single talent. So things were looking quite bleak for Hajime. The time finally came around for him to present his own stats, and he knew what was coming. Hiyama took no time to begin the harassment.
Of course, he's gonna get bullied for it. What?
Because according to Meld, the synergist was kind of like a blacksmith, and it was so common that every 1 in 10 people had the class. Since his stats were nothing special either, Hiyama just kept spouting insults. Kaori was about to say something, but then Aiko-sensei intervened to show that Hajime wasn't the only one with a non-combat class. She had been given the job of a farmer, with many skills related to it, but had average stats in everything else except for magic.
Damn.
Hajime understood that
Why 100 for a farmer in magic? That's mad.
Aiko was trying to make him feel better, but even she had a specialty of her own. There really was nothing Hajime could do to avoid being labeled as the weakest. And sure enough, after 2 weeks had gone by, he was widely known as the most useless member of the class.
Oh my
Don't get
god, that's depressing. That's really depressing. I'd rather it be played out like that from the start and then this, because, like, I don't know, all I've seen from the first episode is, like, this random dude who seems to be from the world that we're seeing, just bad luck and picking himself up.
me wrong though. I mean, he had spent days in training, hoping that he would be able to increase his stats. But even after reaching level 2, his stats only stood at a meager 12. This only served to emphasize how weak he was, because in that same time, Amanagawa was now level 10, and he had stats of 200 all across the board. Hajime didn't even have an affinity for magic, which is one of the major mechanics of magic in the world of Tortoise. So how does magic work exactly? Well, by chanting an incantation, one could transfer their mana into a magic circle. The spell was inscribed into that specific magic circle, and after enough mana was transferred to it, the spell would be activated and cast. Every spell required its own magic circle, and the length of the incantation was directly proportional to how much mana one could pour into it. Likewise, the effectiveness of the spell was proportional to the amount of mana used to cast it, and the more complicated the spell was, the greater the area of effect it had. So, say I wanted to cast a standard fireball spell. That would require
Fireball!
a magic circle of about 10 centimeters across. This magic circle would include all the inscriptions for the element, strength, range, span, and mana capacity. So if I wanted to improve on any of these parameters, then extra inscriptions would be needed that accounted for these changes, resulting in a larger magic circle and a longer incantation.
Right.
There was, however, one exception to this rule though, and that was magical affinity, a mechanic that allows a magic caster to shorten their inscriptions. For example, if someone had an affinity for the fire element, then they would no longer need to add the element portion of the inscription to their spell. Instead,
cool.
they would replace that part with a mental image. In other words, they didn't need
picture
to
it.
carve the inscription anywhere into the magic circle.
But everything
so
else,
long as they
just
were
picture
imagining
that.
flames while chanting the spell, the fire element would be added to it. Meaning, the standard 10 centimeter magic circle would actually be smaller since the element portion wouldn't be in it,
Right.
also making cast time faster. Now, every student had some level of magical affinity. Well, every student except for Hajime. This made magic-based combat completely impractical for him since the cast time of any spell would be way too long. And it's not like he could take anyone on in physical combat either. His stats were just too low. The only thing he could do was use his transmute skill to transform the shape of various ores and forge them together into alloys.
Yeah, he literally just runs away. He's like, transmute, and just creates that little cave for himself, doesn't he? It's like, wow. But then...
Still, he trained this skill, his only skill, eventually becoming able to make pitfalls and protrusions in the ground. The more he trained, the bigger and larger he was able to make them. But he had to be in direct contact with what he was transmuting in order for it to work. Because of that, it wouldn't be very useful in direct combat. In the end, he just accepted his role as being the useless one, studying in the library to pass the time, all the while feeling that he should just head toward the land of the demi-humans, because they also didn't possess any mana and, just like Hajime, were discriminated for it. You see, due to the strong religious presence in Tortoise, it was a common belief that Ahit and the other gods shaped the very foundations of the world with magic. And the magic that everyone uses today is a lesser version of the power that the gods once held. A gift, only bestowed upon those who were deemed worthy. So, because the demi-humans couldn't use magic, they were seen as wicked creatures abandoned by the gods, and as such, highly discriminated against. Demons treated them in a similar way too. They had their own god to worship, one that gave them a much higher magical affinity than any human, resulting in their ability to cast spells with shorter incantations and smaller circles. So it only made sense that they'd also see the demi-humans as inferior. Anyway, even though Hajime could relate to how the demi-humans felt, he really only wanted to go there just to touch some animal ears. But visiting the Eastern nations wasn't really likely. Realistically, the only place he could go to was Erisen, the home of the Seamen, who actually
the sea men
weren't discriminated against because they produced 80% of the kingdom's seafood. Getting there was the hard part though, since it involved crossing a massive desert that was home to one of the 7 labyrinths of the world, a key feature of Tortoise that we'll cover another day. Anyway, Hajime got so caught up in thinking about the places he could visit that he forgot he had to go to training. So he rushed over to the grounds, got bullied a bit by Hiyama, then was told that everyone would be leading an expedition into the Great Orcus Labyrinth in the morning. This was another one of the 7 that was just mentioned.
Right, so this is actually leading up to the first episode, which is absolutely insane. I can't believe how much I've been told from... Thank you for doing this. It makes a lot of sense.
It's a massive dungeon that had a depth of over 100 floors, and the deeper you went, the stronger the enemies became. Still though, the early floors were a popular training spot for...
Like, even in the first episode, it does explain the floors. It tells you what floor they're on, but it's like, it means nothing. So, you assume, maybe, but, I don't know, maybe they start from the bottom upwards.
Adventurers. Especially because the monsters there carried a higher quality of mana crystals. What are these mana crystals, you ask? Well, it's the core of a monster, and they were very important components in magic circle creation. You see, they allowed for a more efficient transferal of mana, as well as made for a very effective source of power, making them useful as tools for both the military and the commoners. Of course, the more powerful the monster, the bigger and purer the crystal would be. This also meant that the monster could use higher leveled spells, and they didn't even need a magic circle to cast them. This was useful information for any adventurer to know, and Hajime contemplated it on the journey towards the labyrinth. He eventually ended up at an outpost town known as Horak, which really only had the purpose of housing those that wanted to challenge the labyrinth. This would be the new training ground for Hajime and his classmates. And that's pretty much how they got to the start of episode 1.
That is insane. So much left out. And there we are. That's crazy. This has made me just want to watch Arifureta to just watch the cut content because I am so intrigued. But yeah, let's finish this off.
Sorta. I still have like 50 more pages of Salazar84's research on episode 1 to go through.
What?
But I think for now this was a decent amount of information that...
Oh, because we have got the cut content of episode 1 as well to check out. Apparently, so that's madness. All right, class. I think this is going to be a lot of fun. This is going to be a lot of fun.
It gives more context as to how everyone got to where they were, as well as how the universe of Tortoise functions. Anyway, since this is a new series, I'm gonna pull a typical YouTuber thing here, and ask that you drop a like if you want to see more of this series. I'm just trying to gauge what the interest in this one will be versus the one that I do for Danmachi next week. And if there's enough for both, then I'll...
That's mad, because I'm like in between this and Danmachi season 4 now, so that's funny.
I'll hire an editor and with their help, start pumping out 2 videos a week in order to cover more content. But that's entirely up to you guys. So, as always, thank you so much for watching, and if you enjoyed this type of anime content, then you already know what to do. So, until next time, ciao.
Ciao. That's madness. I can't believe there's that much left out from the first episode, and he waited until the third episode was out to cover what was left out at the beginning. That's class. So I think what I'll do now is, because Danmachi is nearly finished, well, I need to check out, I think there's 3 Danmachi cut content videos I haven't checked out yet. I'll go between the two. I'll carry on Arifureta. Is it Arifureta? Arifureta and Danmachi. I'll finish off because I think that's going to be finishing off soon, season 4. And yeah, wow, what a way to open a series and still 3 episodes in not explain this stuff. That's crazy. But anyway, thank you. Oh wait, before I do that, please check out my Etsy page. I'm selling t-shirts and hoodies now, and I'll be selling other things eventually. But like every 2 weeks, I'll be adding new designs for hoodies and t-shirts, logo, and my Stay Happy designs that I'm doing. So yeah, that'd be class. And thank you to my patrons. If you want to have your name at the end of every video I upload, link in the description of the Patreon page. $1 a month support channel. It's greatly appreciated. Thank you guys for that. And thank you all for watching. What do you guys think of that? What do you guys think of this? Click like, subscribe, and leave comments down below. Let me know I should watch some future videos. I'll see you guys next time. Bye.